All right, so this is an article that Morgan shared in, I don't know, remember which channel in the Slack. It could have been data science,
Maybe bioevolution.
bioevolution. Yeah, it's relevant there too. This is the Gonzo ML Substack, I guess. And this is Grigory Sapunov, who's I guess co-founder and CTO at Intento, Google developer expert in machine learning. And so he's considering diffusion models, which are a modern sort of machine learning approach in the Evergood regulator theorem paper that we just put out, or is, we're kind of working on still. We talk about diffusion models extensively with respect to the Evergood regulator theorem. And so this is, diffusion models are where you train a model on sort of like some diffusion process, maybe noise, uniform noise. And what you'll do is, like we'll take an example of image processing where you have a bunch of images that you train the model on. But you don't train the model just on the images. You train it on images that are progressively masked by noise. And then the idea is that this noise diffuses across the image, and then you have this ability for the system to recover different types so it basically improves generalizability of the model by training it on noise, by masking the image. It learns sort of the feature, variations in the features that come with increasing amounts of noise being things being masked. So it's an interesting way to approach generalizability in training of models. So this is titled Diffusion Models or Evolutionary Algorithms. So this means that diffusion models, and there are a lot of interesting physical properties of diffusion models. Of course, we have diffusion models in physics. We have like their stochastic models. We use diffusion models for things like morphogenesis. We use diffusion models for things like looking at evolution, because you have like mutational processes that are more, very similar to diffusion models. So it's interesting making that connection, and I agree with this. This is a very important connection. So this is, I guess this is a paper by Michael Levins on it, of course. And it's actually the paper Diffusion Models or Evolutionary Algorithms. So this is the arXiv paper. They're using this diffusion evolution method, an evolutionary algorithm utilizing iterative denoising, as originally introduced in the context of diffusion models to heuristically refine solution and parameter spaces. So they're using this, iterative noising and denoising of, I guess some data, and they're using that to sort of corrupt the signal so that the system can learn about the signal in different ways, in its corrupted form, and then kind of better generalize things. So I'm going to read the top of the abstract. In a convergence of machine learning and biology, we revealed that diffusion models are evolutionary algorithms. By considering evolution as a denoising process and reversed evolution as diffusion, we mathematically demonstrate that diffusion models inherently perform evolutionary algorithms, naturally encompassing selection, mutation, and reproductive isolation. So these are the kinds of functions that you might have in an evolutionary algorithm. You have a mutation operator that mutates the signal. So it's much like if you're introducing noise into the signal. You're selecting for things, so you're selecting for features. And you have populations of programs that are mutated. And if you isolate them, you can, have this sort of genetic drift that allows you to find solutions that maybe you can select them sort of neutrally. So diffusion does all these things, very similar models. And so diffusion evolution efficiently identifies multiple optimal solutions and outperforms prominent mainstream evolutionary algorithms. So this is interesting that we can actually outperform evolutionary algorithms with diffusion. Furthermore, leveraging advanced concepts from diffusion models, namely latent space diffusion and accelerated sampling, we introduce latent space diffusion evolution. which finds solutions for evolutionary tasks in high-dimensional complex parameter space while significantly reducing computational steps. This parallel between diffusion and evolution not only bridges two different fields, but also opens new avenues for mutual enhancement, raising questions about open-ended evolution, and potentially non-Gaussian or discrete diffusion models in the context of diffusion evolution. So a lot of interesting stuff here. There's also a GitHub repository here, which this is where they talk about this, where they're kind of using noise to enhance these clusters. You see that this noise is low fitness, these semi-clusters, the noise is low fitness, and you increase your fitness. Yeah, so you can, the code is here, you can install it and run it. Yeah, so that's the sort of the overview of the sort of the paper and the GitHub repository that they are talking about in this post. So this is where it kind of gives some more context. An interesting paper from Michael Levin and company. This is the same Michael Levin who has been working on bioelectricity, artificial life, and many other biology-related topics. He gave a fantastic talk talking what bodies think about bioelectric computation outside the nervous system at NeuroSim in 2018. This is the talk here. He also did an intriguing keynote, Robot Cancer, what the bioelectrics of embryogenesis and regeneration can teach us about unconventional computing, cognition, and the software of life at ALife 2020. I think we attended ALife 2020 as a lab, and I think I saw this talk there. He co-authored an excellent work on cellular automata and differentiable morphogenesis. This is the still pub, the growing cellular automata. We've talked about this paper before. This paper claims that diffusion models are the paper that we just saw, the arXiv paper, claims that diffusion models are evolutionary algorithms. How so? Let's break it down. So he talks about in the biosphere at least two processes capable of generalization and creating novelty. Evolution, a slow process of adaptation to the environment across generations through natural selection, and learning, a fast process allowing individuals to acquire knowledge and generalize subjective experience during their lifetime. So there have been a number of papers on the connection between evolution and learning, from Hinton's classic How Learning Can Guide Evolution to Van Schuren, Wolf, Katznelson, and Kunin's Towards a Theory of Evolution as Multi-Level Learning, and then Watson and Levin. We talked about Watson before, and then Levin, The Collective Intelligence of Evolution and Development, 2023. The current work argues that a specific class of diffusion models, where a generative model performs sequential stochastic denoising, can be understood through an evolutionary process that performs natural selection, mutations, and reproductive isolation. And so this talks about diffusion models here, where they're doing the denoising, they're recovering an image from noise, and the image is becoming increasingly higher fitness. This process has been worked out quite well. And then we talk about evolutionary algorithms. As you can see, both approaches involve iterative data updates and sampling new objects from complex distributions. Both have a combination of directed updates and random perturbations. There are selection plus mutation, or selection mutation models in evolution's case, random noise, learned denoising in diffusion's case. So it's making the connection between selection mutation in evolution and random noise, learned denoising in diffusion. That's interesting, in the Evergood regulator theorem paper, we actually have two examples. The one example of the sort of diffusion model, and then the example of the learning, unlearning, and relearning experimental paradigm in sensory motor neuroscience. And I'm wondering, and there's some connections made there. I'm wondering if this is a very similar thing. We're hitting on the same thing. This raises the question, is the mechanics of the two processes fundamentally connected? And is there a deep mathematical duality between biological evolution and generative modeling? Or is it all just analogy and vanity of vanities? I think there is a deeper thing from my perspective. Yeah, so looking at species populations in the biosphere, the variational evolutionary process can be understood as a transformation of distributions. Will it be dist to dist analogous to seek to seek? Distribution of genotypes and phenotypes. Mutation and selection jointly change the shapes of these distributions. Many biologically inspired evolutionary algorithms can be understood similarly. They optimize an objective function by maintaining and iteratively changing the distribution of a large population. And this same concept, transformation of distributions, is central to many generative models. VAEs, GANs, and diffusion models learn to transform simple distributions, often standard Gaussians, into more complex ones, where samples represent meaningful images, sounds, and texts. So you can also view diffusion from an evolutionary perspective. During training, data points are noised, and the model learns to predict this added noise to reverse the process. In the sampling phase, the model starts with points from a Gaussian distribution and incrementally updates them through denoising, where noise-free samples are the ideal. So it takes the noise and it removes it through selection and mutation, and then you get this sort of evolutionary process that aligns with interpreting the genome as a latent space parameterization of a multi-scale generative morphogenetic process rather than just a blueprint of an organism. And then there's this analogy to statistical physics and energies and probabilities. So like we talked about statistical physics, where you have the energy landscape and you're trying to minimize the energy landscape. And this is very similar to the evolutionary fitness landscape. So you have this sort of analogy between statistical physics and evolution. You have this analogy between diffusion models and evolution. And so it goes through this math and some of the technical details. And finally, kind of getting to the end where, they consider how diffusion models work and how evolution might improve that and how this whole process is open-ended. So that's great. Great stuff.